Hi, I'm Jamie Hansen.
Hey, and I'm Ray. Welcome to another episode of Bourbon and Biz.
So, what are we drinking today? It is the Elijah Craig Toasted Barrel.
Smells delightful, Jamie.
What do you get off the nose?
You know, we've tried a number of spirits in our filming. This has to be one of the sweeter products that I've enjoyed. It's just really nice.
So, Elijah Craig Toasted Barrel Bourbon was added to their line back in 2020. So, it hasn't been around that long. And a lot of places, it only comes out about one time a year, or a couple times a year, I think. It generally sells for around here is around $60 a bottle. But I saw it online for $130 a bottle if you wanted to buy it on some of these other sites. So it's highly sought after, and it's relatively hard to find because of limited release. So
what do you taste when you've sampled?
I definitely get the oak out of it. It has a dominant oak flavoring, a little bit of caramel and toffee, and
the oakiness though isn't as pronounced as other bourbons, right? It has a nice, smooth, consistency. The mouthfeel, nice viscosity in the product.
Well, it's a little drier, I think, than some of the other whiskeys that we've tasted. And I say whiskey loosely because if you look at the wall, majority of these bottles are Scotch versus bourbon. I have bourbon on another shelf, and I also have whiskey from 36 or 37 countries. So they all fall under the family of whiskey.
No, it's really good. You've had a chance to sample it. Any thoughts?
Well, I'll be perfectly candid. I haven't drank that many bourbons in my life, but I gotta say what I notice immediately is the sweetness and the smoothness.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, whether that comes from the oak or the barrel, I couldn't tell you, but
but it's enjoyable.
It is enjoyable, and now that Jamie mentioned it, the dryness is what I think I'm also enjoying too.
Yeah.
It's a good blend.
So it's a toasted barrel. That means they toast the inside of that oak barrel, and that charcoal that is sitting there does help in mellowing the whiskey as it ages, or the bourbon as it ages. So I think it's very smooth. I think it's one of the better tasting bourbons out there. I really like it, and
all I can say is well done, Elijah Craig. And if you're near or by your favorite liquor store, stop by, get a bottle, sit down, drink responsibly, and enjoy another episode of
Bourbon and Biz.
Hey, we've got a great guest today.
Yeah, so it's Steven?
I go by Steve.
Steve Saw. And could you tell us where you work, a little bit about your background?
Sure. Okay, so guys, thanks for having me on. So currently I work for OSD Comptroller in the program budget side of Comptroller. I'm one of 9 associate directors. So I'm in charge of all O&M appropriations for defense-wide agencies, or what we call the Fourth Estate.
Yeah. So today's episode, I want to talk about leadership. And again, Ray and I this past week, we actually both spoke at a conference, and we spoke to a large group of CFOs, and we talked to them about leadership. And one of the things that we talked about is you need to be proactive. You need to be able to give that presence. And I think a lot of folks, and again, a lot of folks tend to, especially in the finance world, want to sit behind their desk, crunch those numbers, rather than walking around to be able to see the people, to be able to understand what their concerns and problems are, those type of leadership traits. And I know there's been multiple studies done that we shared with the group, is that a lot of the CFOs overwhelming majority of the people that took part of the survey said the CFO was competent. He or she knew how to do data analytics,
The technical stuff.
all the technical stuff. But what they felt that they were lacking in was the executive skills, going out there and to be able to meet with people and to be able to talk issues through. So, what are your thoughts on that? First thoughts.
So first, I think this topic is really timely, especially in our financial management community. If you go back 2.5 years, I believe the financial workforce in the Department of Defense specifically, has been stressed. We've had prolonged CRs.
Yeah.
You had a very chaotic transition between administrations. You've had budgets that gone up late. So when I look at my team, what federal budgeting is supposed to be cyclical with peaks and valleys. I think we've been at a peak since at least right before the last presidential election. So I believe our community is overworked, and I do think you're starting to see parts of it break just because folks are working so much. It's the same folks doing execution, it's the same folks doing formulation, it's the same folks doing audit. It's all that same gal or guy, and frankly, it's a lot, and it's been unending. And so I think that is, to me, when we talk about leadership, and we'll get into the specifics, the overall health and what do we do to keep motivating what I think is a very talented group of folks to continue to rise to these unending challenges. If you've been working international programs, you did an Afghan withdrawal, pretty tough. Then you went, I think we had a couple earthquakes in between, and now we have Ukraine. So if folks are in that space, I hear you. They're, we call them like the 911 of the department, because they're always getting the call from the E-ring. So I think leadership really has to first recognize the challenge, the morale. You put in the normal retirement waves that seems to be hitting us. There's a lot of on the people side we need to be aware of. And so I start with kind of I agree with you. I think one of the premise of good leadership, I've been told leadership is a contact sport.
Sure.
You have to get out there.
Right.
You guys will be familiar. You got to walk the perimeter.
Yeah.
You got to get out there. You have to get in the cubicles of your employees. You have to find out what's going on. If something difficult is happening in their personal life, you got to address that, right? It's all about having those relationships. I believe relationships are key to having happy, satisfied employees, because those are the employees that will continue to produce and serve the department. So I completely agree with you. And I would add one other further complication is we're coming out of COVID. A lot of different components are putting together what does it mean to return to work. I think the bottom line is, for the vast majority of the community, it's going to be some type of hybrid
Work
environment.
Sure.
So when you don't see that person day to day, or you only see them a couple times a week, all those challenges you just talked about are magnified, and leaders have to find solutions that work. Because I don't think we're going to go back to 5 days a week in the office.
Yeah, and I feel that on the federal sector, especially, the development of tools be able to handle those types of issues is slow in adoption, and two, there's so many issues with what's available now in the private sector with the security that we need for the systems that we hold. So, there's like Monday, I don't know if you heard of that, but there's Monday.com that goes out there and helps you manage people that are teleworking. We need to develop those type of tools and have that readily available. And and I think we're very slow to adopt. But another question that I have, if I may, is I know that between 2021, there was something like 2.1 million baby boomers that retired earlier than expected. Are you seeing large numbers of exodus of individuals either like retiring early or leaving for private sector due to
attrition. The challenge of managing attrition and then recruiting and retaining talent. That's got to be a significant leadership concern.
Oh, it is. I think anyone who works at kind of the headquarters level is seeing what I'm seeing is I haven't seen an uptick in retirements or people putting in their papers.
Okay.
And I think there's a lot of analysis going on. Some people can't afford to retire, or they're just putting off because people are living longer. So that's stuff that I'm not quite that up to date on.
Sure.
So I haven't seen, at least in OSD, I don't think we've seen a big retirement wave hit us. But what we are seeing is when people do leave, the normal kind of like, let's say, installation or lower level offices, which you will, they don't seem to have the experienced person and then we can then pull up to the OSD level. Mm-hmm. And so what, at least in comptroller, you're actually seeing so OSD, at least in comptroller, the model was always you get very senior 14s and 15s who had 10 and 15 years trained by the service or at the defense agencies, and you were getting a very finished product.
Mm-hmm.
The number of those 14s and 15s down at the services and the defense agencies, I feel like that pool has shrunk. Mm-hmm. So I think what we're seeing is recruiting has become very hard. So OSD is used to having a big bench of 14s and 15s to hire from. That bench has gotten smaller. Now, is that because of what's going on at the lower levels? We're not sure, but what we're seeing is it is definitely harder to hire.
How has, anyone following the business trade regs, a lot has been published and talked about with regard to the Great Resignation. Is that, have you seen that emerge as an issue or even significant issue within DoD?
So I don't know DoD writ large, but I am aware of that. Just anecdotally, there were certainly let's say folks who were more experienced who just did not want to work online or virtual. Either the tools were frustrating or it was a different medium. So I'm sure that the pandemic kind of spurred retirements for folks who maybe could have worked a couple more years, but they decided that like this was the right time. I think we'd have to look at OPM statistics, how we're doing government wide, but I don't have a good pulse on that.
No, I appreciate that feedback. I know that's in the minds. Even just this last week, I was reading a couple of articles about kind of the effects of the pandemic and all these kinds of issues. For folks that are in uniform, both enlisted and officer that are about to retire, and they're considering maybe, do I go work? I've got a finance background. Do I go to work for a Fortune 5, 100? Do I go work, do consulting and contracting? What's there available for me in the government space? Is there any thoughts or advice that you'd give to those kinds of folks that are maybe trying to discern?
So foremost, I do know for everyone that is a big bridge to cross to go from active duty to becoming a civilian. I would say the first advice is don't underestimate the change.
Yeah.
But having said that, I've seen numerous officers who have transitioned well into a GS or an SES role, and they've continued to excel as they did when they were in uniform. So despite what I just said, I don't think it's an impossible bridge to cross. In terms of advice, what I've seen for those successful transitions, it's always because they transitioned to a civilian position in an area they were familiar with, or an area maybe they had worked in when they were on active duty. It's when you see, I'm going to use a crazy example here. You have a program manager wanting to become a budget person. I think those are the tougher jumps. It can be done, but I think it makes it harder. To me, it's the personnel expert
Yes.
manpower expert
Right.
who now gets a civilian job in PNR. I think those type of transitions, at least I've noticed, go well, and then the person making the transition feels satisfied and gets satisfaction from the job.
No, I think that's helpful for some of those that are watching to kind of hear. It starts to generate some thought and thinking behind what do I need to do now and prepare. And I think one of the helpful things now, particularly in the Army, I assume all services, but I don't know, but in the Army now, personnel can put down their retirement paperwork 24 months out, so that gives them some additional time to think about these things and to prepare. As a leader, a senior leader in the finance corps, what kind of education certifications is the branch looking for?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, if your audience wasn't aware, if you a couple of years ago, similar to the acquisition field, if you want to be in the finance field, a 500 series to be really technical, you need to have first obtain and maintain what we call the Department of Defense Financial Manager certification. So a civilian who's coming into any resource management job will be expected to get 80 hours or whatever the requirement is, get your certification, and then maintain that for as long as they work. And so that was the idea, to kind of professionalize the financial management workforce the same way DIWEA did for the acquisition workforce, if you're familiar with what DIWEA is. So first, be aware that that type of certification is needed. I think in terms of what we're looking for, I think CDFM still has a lot of currency. I know with this DoD FM certification coming online, maybe the number of CDFMs has gone down.
Oh,
But
really?
CDFMs it's a great grounding, it's a great certificate, certainly something good to look for. I think, we see the banner right here. I think folks who have been fortunate enough to go through the Syracuse kind of comptroller or financial management schools, I personally think that is a great training ground. And if that's on your resume or CV, highlight that.
Sure.
Yeah, so it goes back to one, being competent at your job, and there are people out there that go out there and earn their CPA or their MBA or other type of degree in order to be able to just do their job well, right? And then the second piece, like you said, is certification, and there's FMC levels 1, 2, 3, MET on where you are in the food chain, right? So the higher functioning levels will demand the level 3, and then some of the entry level positions will demand a 1. And it goes back out there, just do a good job, study, learn. There's so much training available. You can go ahead and be able to get that type of training. I do an assessment of new staff that comes through, and we're trying to produce a test. And by taking that test, then we kind of know you have excellent skills in the budget side, but you don't really know how to do audit or RIMIC or whatever the other issue is that you may need to know. And then there are online training available through various different agencies out there. So it's up to the individual.
No, that's a great framing, Jamie, and everything that's been shared, I think, is helpful to those that are watching. We're talking about leadership, and if you're watching and trying to follow, you might feel like, well, where are they going? But I think there's a reality to leadership in that there are practical, technical skills that you need to own, right? I mean, there are skills and knowledges to be an effective leader. There's a reality, the hard side of leadership is being able to plan, organize, resource direct, control, those kind of harder kinds of things. But then there's also a softer, more characteristic, who you are, the ethics, the soft people skills. I'm wondering if you could maybe peel that back for those that are watching. What are the the less tangible, more harder to
Yeah.
manage kind of leadership qualities.
Another great question, and it's really relevant again as we come out of the pandemic. I think there's a much more emphasis on wellness and mental health. That's all good things, and I think as leaders we need to be. That's I think another part of the job that we have to embrace that maybe you didn't have to before pandemic, and I think it really gets down to what we call the experts call emotional intelligence. I really think it comes down to empathy. I really think today's leader needs to empathize. And to me, I'll define what empathy is. It's knowing, Ray or Jamie, what you're thinking or where you're coming from or why you may be advocating a certain course of action. Not to get along, but to understand. And so when we disagree, we can better understand why we're not seeing eye to eye. And I think we can always agree to disagree, but I think when you're empathetic and you really can put yourself in the other person's shoes, I think it really reduces those instances. So I personally, I made a challenge to me to really increase my emotional intelligence and specifically empathy, because I think people have a lot going on, and I think again the last few years have kind of exacerbated any stresses, and you just got to know what your people are feeling. And I would say the other thing, we talk about good leaders. I think there's also been kind of a renewed focus. I think it's a good thing. Is I think as a leader, you personally have to know what are your core values, and I think leadership has many effective forms. What works for you and works for you won't work for me. Part of it has to be, you have to be true to yourself. So if you're more of an introverted type of person, trying to emulate General Patton may not work, right? Because you're not going to come off as authentic.
Right.
And so I think, again, leadership always starts with knowing yourself, and to take that one step forward, having those 3 or 4 core values that you will not stray from no matter what. I just think it's we just need to do a better job and just always think about those core values as leaders daily.
Yeah, keep it in the forefront of the mind, and I think the homework from that is how do I take those ideas and then integrate it into my everyday practice. Yeah, that's great.
All right. Well, I appreciate you coming onto the show today and to be able to share your thoughts and wisdom. I think there's a lot to be learned from this, and we just again scratched the tip of the iceberg, and I value your insights. So thank you for doing that.
Friends, cheers to
All
long
right.
life, health, and wellness.
All right.
Be well.
All right. Cheers to you.